AC-130 was developed strictly for night operations on the trail. Very, 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 very seldom did they fly daylight missions. The only time they flew a daylight mission was if there was nobody else available and a gunship was going to save the life of a platoon that was being held down, or a base that was being held down by the bad guys. Otherwise, even then, very seldom would they go up, because the AC-130 was too vulnerable for daylight operations. It was designed to fly at night. That's how it could survive. And so anyway, the 105 came in because the amount of AAA that we were getting was getting more sophisticated, and we had to have a higher ceiling to operate under. The 40 millimeters could still be within that threshold of operational ceiling. The 20s less so. The 20s were only kept on for, I think, because of times when they could fly low enough, the 20s could be brought to bear. In the back end of the aircraft were the gunners, and then you had a couple of what we called illuminator operators. And their primary job is to sit there with binoculars, laying down, looking for muzzle flashes or smoke or anything that would indicate that there's AAA coming up to meet the aircraft. And they're laying there tethered with a nylon strap, just like the same width and type that a regular seatbelt, is made out of. And once they let the pilot know that there's AAA coming up, they tell them which way to zig. You go left or right or whatever. And when that happens, it's done very quickly. Now you got to remember, like I keep saying, these guys are laying on this down position ramp of the AC-130, 8,000, maybe 10,000 feet up in the air at night. And they're looking for flashes with their binoculars. They spot them. They tell the pilot, hey, drop left, turn right, whatever. As soon as that happens, they still got the binoculars in their hands, and the pilot just drops the aircraft. Now, what do you think is going to happen gravity-wise to these guys? They go flying out that ramp, and they're tethered by that nylon strap, and they're doing this. And they're dangling out, and they were given a name called the triple Bs. They big brass balls. That's what they were known as, because they'd be swinging out there, and to show how tough they were, they would ask permission of the pilot to come back on board. But they were swinging outside that aircraft, 8,000 feet in the dark, and they'd come back in. They'd be grabbed, and they'd start all over again, and the whole process would start over again. The side scanner would do his job. Then the gunners. You had the gunners. The 20 millimeter gunner's job was twofold. Scoop the empty brass cylinders. There are literally hundreds of them. When a fire mission occurred, the rotating cannon, I believe, was something like up to 2,000 rounds a minute. So it wouldn't take long for all that brass to pile up, and it had to be taken care of. So they had to police the brass by picking it up with a big snow shovel into a bag. The second part of their job was that if the 20 millimeter rotating belt became fouled, they had to find the cause of that, unjam it, and make it work again. And they did this at night with one of those little mini flashlights held firmly in their mouth with a red lens, trying to figure out where the problem was. As the plane is jinking, flying, they can't see anything else at night. They had to do it all by feel. The 40 millimeter crew with the Beaufort cannons had a clip of 4 to 5 shells in a clip weighing between 8 and 10 pounds. There's two of them standing side by side. The guy who's got the clip in his hands and is handing it to the guy next to the gun, who seats it into the 40 millimeter magazine, and has to do this continuously because it's a constant rate of fire. And if a jam occurs, they've got to, once again, by feel with a flashlight in their hands, figure out where the jam is, unjam it so that the plane. And so when they're standing there feeding the cannon, they're standing in a semi-braced position because they never know when the aircraft is going to pull some evasive maneuvers. And if you tried standing, semi-braced, holding 8 to 10 pounds for an hour, now the ramp is down, remember that. The aircraft ramp is in a down position so the IOs can lay there. Freezing air is pouring in, noise from the aircraft, from the engines, you know, from the ground fire, from the cannons, from the, you know, all that going off is horrendous. You're wearing these Mickey Mouse ears because that's the only way you can, you know what's going on. And if one of the wires gets pulled off and your mic goes off or your comms go off, you don't know what's going to happen next. So you have to try and figure it out. And again, it's night. There's no light in the cabin because if 10,000 feet, even a little prick of light can be seen very readily by the bad guys. So it's totally dark, windy, noisy, cold. My mom was wondering why I was asking for thermal underwear, you know, to be sent to
Southeast Asia. Yeah. What
So
sort of targets?
This is the conditions.
Right. What sort of targets were these aircraft going for on the
Okay.
trail?
Initially, they were designed for anything and everything that the trail offered in its infancy. Like you pointed out earlier, the North Vietnam, the troops figured out how to take up to 800 pounds of supplies on a bicycle. They modified these bicycles. Before that, they had teams of elephants carrying supplies. Then as the trail became more sophisticated and they widened it and made actual roads, you got into your Russian and Chinese primarily made trucks that are equivalent to our 2.5 ton trucks, the military trucks that you see with the American Army. They had the same thing, except that they were made by the Russians and by the Chinese. And you had convoys of them. You also had pipelines that carried petroleum products, gas, diesel, and oil that were stored in tanks in limestone caverns. Some of these tanks were maybe about 30, 40 feet high, 8 to 10 feet in width, and they were full of fuel that they would build up and then by gravity feed carry it to its next station. You had parking lots where the trucks would wait out the day so that they can move at night, and those were targets very important. You had ammunition dumps that were buried in the jungle and camouflaged that we had to find and eliminate. So the targets were primarily moving targets of trucks. You had personnel because the military, the NVA was sending whole divisions down in preparation for for that offensive that was going to occur in April.
The Easter offensive, yeah.
Yes, the Easter offensive. You had tanks now for the first time making their way down. And then, of course, you had all the trucks carrying the supplies, the food, the ammunition, and personnel. So it was a variety of targets. But the thing about it was that the equipment that we had was so good that it could detect the motors and the batteries of these trucks, even when they were quiet, even when they were still. We had good technology, we just didn't have enough of it.
About how many missions on the AC-130 did you fly?
12.
12. And so what's your role? Because you're a photographer, documentarian. So are you just filming or taking photos of everything that's happening on the plane just to document what's happening on the plane?
On the manifest, I was called an observer. I wasn't a crew member. I was an observer. The more missions I flew, the more I was recognized by other crew members of the squadron.
Yeah.
The easier it became for me. My first few missions were really hard. They didn't know who, they didn't know me. I was an odd man. If anything, I could be a liability more than a credibility. So I had to prove myself. One of the ways that I did that was that when the missions started, we had to put our camera gear away because there's no way you're going to use a flash in a combat environment.
Oh, I see.
So the camera gear got put away when the actual mission started. We photographed everything up to the mission. I went to the master gunner And I said, put me to work. You know, where do you want me? I'm an extra set of hands. I may not be a gunner, but hey, teach me, I'll learn. And, you know, so most of the time I shoveled brass. I moved the big 55-gallon drums full of empty casings so that they can be stored and tied down. I checked oxygen bottles to make sure the ones that were full were readily available, because you know, oxygen was needed to maintain your work level. What else did I do?
By shovel
I
brass, you mean by shovel brass, you mean the empty bullet
Yeah, the empty
casings
casings.
that
Yeah,
I've used.
I'd go up to the 20-millimeter guy and I would relieve him so that he can have a break. And I would shovel the stuff into the bags. Or if he had to have a jam while he was fixing the jam, I was trying to catch up on all those empty cartridges so that when he fixed the jam, he wouldn't have to then shovel the empties. As I gained more experience in the missions and got to know some of the gunners, they allowed me to sit at the side scanner and help him locate tracers. I would point it out to him, and then he would actually make the announcement to the pilot of tracer fire because he could identify it. I never became so good that I could identify what that tracer represented. I would just say, hey, look over there, there's some. And he would say, oh, yeah, 37 millimeter, 55 millimeter, whatever. Because each tracer had a specific pattern that indicated the caliber or millimeter of the round.
And these were NBA firing artillery.
Packet Lao. Primarily these guys are Packet Lao, yeah.
Okay, firing the anti-aircraft shells at you. Of the 12 missions, did you come under fire on all 12?
All of them.
Yeah.
Some worse than others. The worst one was my first one. that was a lessons well learned on that one. The problem with being a crew member on those birds was that they never was not so much in the job, but in the safety equipment that you had. In addition to having your flight suit and the thermals and all that to keep you warm, you also had a helmet with the comms, you know, either on the outside or built in, but nobody wore the helmet because it was too bulky. Yeah, and then you had the survival vest, and that was bulky enough as it is. And on top of that, you had the chute that had to be buckled on to the survival vest, and the chute put you out like you were, you know, 8 months pregnant. And you had this gun that you had to operate. There's no way wearing that chute could you realistically operate that gun. So the chutes and the vests many times were hung with the parachute clipped on pegs all up and down next to the gunners. They had their pegs. I was an observer. I didn't rate a peg. So I had to find a slot for my chute and my vest when I got on board so I can do my job. But the thing is, I had to remember where that chute and that vest was stashed when the lights went out. And my first mission, I was so busy trying to get the photographs that I remember stashing it in the corner near the 40-millimeter station and forgetting about it. And I went about my job and all that, and then we feet wet into the bad guy country, combat lighting, and I'm going, oh, where's my chute? Because I can't remember. I'm still disoriented. You know, it's my first mission. I'm still trying to figure out where everything is. I flew that whole mission scared to death because I didn't know where my chute was, and I was hoping that we would not be hit, because if the plane went down, that was it. There's no way I was going to get out of it.
Now you see, you don't have infrared on or anything, so it's just pitch dark. You can't.
It's pitch dark. The only thing that you can use is your little red lens flashlight to find your way. Now, if you're flowing, if you're a crew member of the squadron and you've done this countless times, you know every inch of that aircraft.
Sure.
You know, but if you're me and you're just stumbling around and well, the funny part about it was that when the lights finally came on, a voice came on from the master gunner saying, if the if the how do you put it? If the cameraman is looking for his shoot, we got it here, nice, safe, and sound for him, you know. And of course, everybody in the aircraft just bust up laughing because they knew what I did wrong. So that was a lesson learned. That was a lesson learned.
Wow.
The other part that I experienced was, again, remember, you're doing everything in a half braced position. If you're loading 40 millimeter shells, you're half braced, ready for that plane to do evasive maneuvers. I remember I was helping the 40 millimeter gunners. The guy was just about ready to hand me, the gunner was just about ready to hand me the clip that I was going to give to the gunner. And what I didn't know was that the cord to my internal comm system was unplugged. So I wasn't hearing any sounds. And I thought at first it was that nobody was talking. And the plane just did a dive. It just went bam, just like that.
Wow.
And I remember having that 40 millimeter clip going flat on my back, laying there, looking up at the ceiling, holding, because the gravity, you know, we're pulling now the G's, and I can't do anything but hold this thing that's just pressing into my chest. And I'm laying there, you know, with my eyes, it must have been about that big.
Yeah.
And when the plane leveled out, the master gunner, I could see it was him because when he opened his mouth to grin, I could see the whites of his teeth, you know, with his hand out, pulling me up.
Wow.
And I still held the 40 millimeter round. So I said, well, he says, at least you didn't drop the damn rounds, huh?
Right.
You know?
Wow. Now, were you strapped in as well?
No. You're only strapped in if you're doing the IO mission. Everything else you got to have, because you got to move around the cabin, and you can't move if you got a nylon strap to you. You just have to prepare yourself for any evasive actions, and if you aren't prepared, well, that's the consequences.
So you took anti-aircraft fire on each of the missions. Did any of that fire on any of those 12 missions do any significant damage to the plane?
No, I was very fortunate. Very, very fortunate. The biggest damage was holes in the fuselage and in the tail section, you know, from shrapnel, from nearby bursts. But no, I was very, very, very fortunate.
I think you write
one
about.
of the aircraft,
I'm sorry.
pardon?
I think you write about when there was a burst close to the plane, you could smell the.
Oh yeah, the cordite. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
You always knew how close they burst because the cordite. You got to remember, since you're flying unpressurized, and you've got these openings in the side, and you've got the total opening in the back. All that air is being sucked into the aircraft, and so if a burst occurs nearby, the cordite is being sucked into the aircraft as well, and you could smell it. Flying over the skies of Laos and Cambodia and all that, I flew with some incredibly brave and professional pilots and crew members, incredibly professional. But it wasn't their professionalism that created the problems. It was the bureaucracy behind the war that created the problems that then escalated into the almost comical, or I should say black comical results of the war. An example.
Yeah.
If I flew a daylight mission with a pilot, the first thing that we had to do once we put together our area that we're going to fly over was we had to make darn sure that there was nothing nearby that was considered either a no fly zone or a no fire zone. Because if we flew into that area or if we dropped ordnance in that area, our careers were shot. The pilot's wings were gone. I was going to be sent back to the States. Now, how do you fight a war when you have to augment to your map little squares that you may or may not go into in the pursuit of your mission? Now, it didn't take long for the enemy to figure out where those places were, and they used them to their advantage. As a matter of fact, I've seen photographs, not that I've taken, but I've actually seen the photos of daylight missions where small miniature convoys of trucks are parked in the open in an area that they knew they could not be hit because nearby was a village of civilians that because it was near where those trucks were, we could not hit those trucks.
So you
And
have,
they sat there. They just sat there and waited us out. And if you escalate that kind of a thinking to more dramatic scenarios where where people who fly at night and make a mistake or something like that are then called on the carpet for that, or they can't use certain munitions because those munitions are going to create quote unquote a civilian casualties beyond the scope of what we wanted to deal with, because if we dealt with those casualties, it would mean that we would have to then tell the American people that we're in Laos and we're in Cambodia, and that's something that was being kept a secret, an open secret, but still a secret. Well, then you can see how people are going to get very discouraged about wanting to fight a war with those kind of situations, and your hands tied behind your back.
and this was something you were very aware of at the time.
It didn't take long. It took a couple of missions of flying to some guys that were very frustrated about having to deal with this kind of a scenario day in, day out. See, being a documentarian, I didn't fly every night. I didn't have to go out on missions that these guys had to do.
Yeah.
And so it was less frustrating for me, but I noticed in talking to them, it was very frustrating for them.